Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming tonight. So we're talking about sickness and health tonight. Here's my question. How long is flu season? It feels like every time it seems like people have stopped posting on Facebook that they are near death, then there's a whole nother round of near-death Facebook posts. And I'm really tired of looking in horror at people when they cough near me. Like, I am that guy. Hopefully we are all in good health tonight, and we're going to have some great stories. So why don't we get to it? And help me welcome to the stage Steve Ford.
Hello.
Hi, Steve. How's it going?
Hey.
So if you are new to Hearsay, then you don't know, perhaps, that we, at every show, we introduce the performers with a performer question that is related to the theme. Now, there were so many ways that we could go with sickness and in health. So the question tonight that you are going to start us off with, what is one of the strangest things you've seen at a wedding?
Well, let's see. At the time, I was dating a girl, and she was a friend of a friend of a friend. So she was barely on the list for the wedding. So I was somewhere else in a different universe. But it was a very small wedding in a very small church in the middle of like the rural area of the thumb, and the priest, I'll never forget this, had an eye patch. And not like a marble eye or something, but like the full on like strap around the head and everything. And he did the whole ceremony like that.
So like, were you like saying "yar" after everything
I
he
definitely
said?
was.
That would be irresistible.
Every sentence that he said, I added "yar" after it.
How could you not?
How could you not?
All right, another round of applause for Steve.
All right, so when I was in about the third grade, I started to get this kind of a pain in my side. Nothing terrible, like kind of like a headache, I guess. I mean, it wasn't bad enough that it stopped me from doing anything, and it didn't like hinder my ability to go throughout my daily life. I don't know. And I was the kind of kid that they had to drag into and out of every doctor's office ever, especially if there's a needle involved. So I really wasn't motivated to do anything about it. And if I laid down on a heating pad, it would go away. So I just figured it was part of being a heavier kid, and I just dealt with it. And I continued to deal with it all the way through middle school and high school and college. And it just was the thing that I just lived with. In that time, the pain would come in longer and stronger bursts. And as is the case with fear, I was afraid of the doctor, and I was worried that there was something wrong with me. And that if I had to go to the doctor about it, they would have to have surgery and fix it. So it's kind of like, I guess, putting off exercise. Like, I know it's going to feel better in the long run, but I'm going to have pain now. And it's really easy to rationalize the pain now because it's comfortable here. So it wasn't until about February of 2005 that it stopped being comfortable here. And the pain in my side went from being this kind of a headache that it was annoying to like full-on migraine that I was dealing with. And I was laying on the couch, nothing helped. I stopped working out, that didn't work. Even my heating pad didn't help. And I was starting to miss social obligations because I was laid up and I was feeling bad. So I decided, okay, now's the time I finally have to deal with this pain in my side. So I was a grown man. I had my parents' HMO card. So I decided it was time to do the right thing. I went to the Mount Pleasant Urgent Care, and I was pretty nervous that I was going to have to get a shot or something, and you know how doctors are. They want to hurt you and make you feel better. So I only had to get an x-ray that day, thankfully. And the x-ray, I can do an x-ray, no big deal, but the x-ray had a little spot on it on my right side, so I had to get a CAT scan. Now, this was 2005. A CAT scan was a little more of a big deal than it is now. I had to fast for 12 hours. I had to get an IV, which I had never had before, and being scared of needles was terrible. And then they hooked the IV up to this medieval-looking machine, and they put a 10-ounce bottle in there, and they shotgunned this thing full of contrast solution into my veins, all in like 3 seconds. And the CAT scan kind of identifies my kidneys as the target, so I had to go get another scan called an IVP. And this one required 24 hours of fasting and another IV. And finally, after all that, I was starting to get used to this stuff, but it was actually kind of cool to see my kidneys all lit up on the screen. I was like, hey, this is nice. I was terrified to see that the kidney on the right was twice the size of the kidney on the left, and they were conjoined together into one big mass. So I have what's called a horseshoe kidney, I learned in that moment. A horseshoe kidney is a pretty benign thing where your two kidneys are just kind of connected together by a little isthmus of kidney flesh, and it's usually not a big deal. I have a kind of a special horseshoe kidney where like stone and crystalline matter doesn't drain out like it's supposed to. It just kind of sinks to the bottom. So on top of my two kidneys, where one is larger than the other, I also had 3 rocks sitting inside of them. The smallest was 5 millimeters, the middle one was 7 millimeters, and the big daddy was 2.6 centimeters thick. Now, as you consider the diameter of your urethra in metric, allow me to assure you, I never had to pass any of those bad boys. That's physically impossible. And I did learn later on that my delaying this appointment had nothing to do with the actual diagnosis. This would have happened no matter what. But it was kind of like Pandora's box. Once the doctors knew about the stones, once I had shown my body to the doctors, they're not going to leave until the stones were dealt with. So it was finally time for me to embark on this series of surgeries that I had to do to get myself fixed. So the first thing they attempted was a thing called ureteroscopy, where they go in with a laser and they chip away at the stones. It's very futuristic and cool. They chip away at the stones and they collect the matter and they draw them out of there. So for a kid that hated the doctor and hated needles, felt like I was starting to get pretty used to this. Felt like kind of a badass. I was like, okay, I got this. I had to get an IV, but this time I had to get like general anesthesia, which is terrifying, especially if you've never had general anesthesia before. Like, I'm gonna go to sleep, and what if I don't wake up? But all I have to do is show up and go to sleep. No big problem. Okay, that's fine. I was, however, an inattentive 20-year-old, and I missed the part where they were going to do all this through my urethra. Something about being hooked up to a heart monitor takes away your ability to have a poker face about how comfortable you are with things. They're describing how they're going to go invade through my junk. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, that's fine. I'm cool with this. And the heart monitor is going 180 beats per minute. Like, no. Okay. But hey, I was there. I was buckled in. I was on the roller coaster. I was over the hill anyway. I'm in for the ride. I was asleep. Okay. So there's no sleep like anesthesia sleep. Man, it's so comfortable. And you wake up and they have that big toasty blanket on. And you're so comfortable. And I was like, this is over. The pain is gone. Finally. You know, doctors are wonderful people, but they can be such killjoys. So he informed me the stones were too large for the laser. I probably could have told him that. But he said, okay, so you have to have a more invasive surgery. We're going to cut you open and actually take the stones out through your back. And then the pain was still there, too. So now I'm there and my pain hurts. And then I look down and I see this string. So the string is attached to a stent, and a stent is a little plastic tube that they had up there in my ureter to help it open up and heal, and that has to come out later, so it's attached to a string, and the string is just there. And there's no real pain nerves in there, so you don't really feel anything, but there's a little knot at the end of the string, so anytime I was standing up or sitting down or walking anywhere, I could feel that little thing sliding. Yeah. But okay, so now I was at my complete limit though. Like I had put up with IVs and fasting and laxatives and all this stuff, and finally, I was gonna get this taken care of. So 3 weeks later, I went into the Midland Community Hospital to have the big operation. And this is a big deal. Cutting in your kidneys is not ideal at all. I had to be there for at least 3 days because they're gonna come take the stones out and then they have to monitor me to make sure I'm healing up okay. But I was a hospital warrior by now. IV check, no problem. Naked in front of strangers, easy. Relaxing anesthesia, give me the drugs, you know. But right before I go in, he comes in, he's like, all right, let me see the string. So, this juvenile delight on my face, I pull up by my blanket, here you go. And he just grabs that string and starts yanking and yanking and yanking and yanking. And this stent bursts forth from my urethra, all covered in bodily juices. And then I went to sleep, and that was the last thing I remember. So The recovery from this is what I usually describe as the worst week of my life. The stones were removed, and I woke up in like the kind of pain from you just got cut open pain. Not anything like this ache that I've been dealing with for 20 years, but like you just had surgery pain. I could barely stand up. Walking was a chore. Showering was impossible. And they gave me morphine, which is okay. And they gave me TV, which is better with morphine. But I was just chained to this bed in agony now. Instead of this rolling ache I've been dealing with, I had this sharp pain anytime I went to do anything. And I was starting to smell, everything was smelling like plastic and body odor and death. And I had this poor roommate I had. You know, I was alone most of the time there, and he was 80 years old, and he had some terrible gastrointestinal disease, and he was, like, I think probably slowly dying the whole time I was there, and there's nothing for me to do. I was just there. I had optimistically packed all my college books, like I was going to get some studying done. a cartoonish fantasy, I now realize. And I had another stent in through my back, too, so I was really pinned to this bed. And it was to help everything drain. But I wasn't draining well enough, I guess, so my 3-day stay turned into a 6-day stay pretty quick. It was, to be sure, miserable. But somewhere, I think the searing pain of my surgery plus the anxiety of I need to get back to class to pass my exams started to mix together. And I hit my limit about, on the 6th day, I finally cussed out some poor nurses. When the f*** am I going to get out of here? And I don't know if that worked, but the doctor showed up 2 hours later, so maybe that's okay. Anyway, I was draining fine, so I was clear to go. And it wasn't until I was about in the parking lot with my parents and I realized something that maybe the whole week of misery had really covered up, but that pain that I had just dealt with, that had been like kind of just aching in my back for like 20 years of my life, was completely gone. And I was like, is this how life just is for regular people? It was amazing. I mean, it was like taking off ankle weights after 20 years. I felt so strong and free. It was great. So I spent the next 2 years in and out of hospitals and ORs, learning more about my special kidneys, checking to see if it was life-threatening or not. It's not. Trust me. I went from being this kid who was scared of needles and doctors and hospitals to, casually laying on my stomach with a tube in my back, pumping saline through, discussing the finer points of the music of Prince with the anesthesiologist who's keeping me good and healthy. And it didn't matter, because I had gone from this scared kid to being pain-free. I was free. Until about last year, when the pain came back. Like an old friend. Now I'm getting out in front of this one. I just had a CAT scan last year. 1 7mm stone. Pfft, no big deal. And it hasn't grown at all in the last calendar year either, so that's a win. So it doesn't matter. I'm pain-free, and hospitals and medical technology has gotten better and stronger, and so have I. This time, I know what I'm made of.
Thank you, Steve. So I want to let you all know that was actually Steve's first time on the Hearsay stage. And, so we have 3 more main stage shows after tonight. So if you have not yet told the story on the Hearsay main stage, we are welcoming and waiting for you. All right, I would like to bring up our next performer, Karen Killian. Hi, Karen.
Hi, Karen.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. So, what is one of the strangest things that you have seen at a wedding?
Well, about a decade ago, my husband and Matt and I were working in Peru, and we were invited to a wedding randomly. We had no idea that we were going to be invited to this wedding, just a coworker of mine. But we were glad, free food, nice party. We thought it'd be great to go to this wedding in the fanciest place in the capital city of the state where we were living in Peru. And we get to this wedding and we realize that we've never met the bride or the groom, but we are seated at the head table, And not only are we seated at the head table, we're seated at the head table because we are the celebrity gringos of the party. And everybody really, really wants to see us. So we were invited to this wedding specifically so that everybody could see us and be impressed.
So did you take it upon yourself to get up and say, El diccionario de Webster define el matrimonio como...
No, I don't think I said anything, but I drank all of the free beer I could get.
Excellent. All right, another round of applause for Karen.
So I first glimpsed the village of Santo Domingo Este from the back seat of a white Range Rover. I was 22 years old, and I had graduated from college a few months before. And at some point during my senior year of college, when I was trying to decide what I should do next with my life, I'd wandered into the career office at my university and began flipping through one of these white plastic binders. This was the sum total of the career advice and guidance available at my university, was a stack of white plastic binders with some things in folios inside. And in one of these binders, I saw a flyer for a volunteer program through the Public Information Office of the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees, if you don't know that acronym. And this program was recruiting volunteers to go live in a refugee camp and write about their experiences. And one of the programs they had was beginning that year in southern Mexico, later that fall, right after I'd graduated. And then so I immediately thought, well, this is perfect. I like to write, and I'd been studying Central America. It didn't matter to me that I had to buy my own plane ticket or that I would not be getting paid any more than what I needed to live on during the month I would be in the camp, nor did it matter to me that there was no future job involved in this experience or I'd be returning home broke and jobless. After I was done, I wanted an adventure. Also, I had been studying Central America in school. And so I had been studying all these atrocities of history and all of the ways that the United States had intervened in Guatemala and basically all of the ways our country had caused this brutal civil war. And it left me with this overwhelming feeling of anger and guilt. And I didn't know what to do with all this anger and guilt. And so I sat down and I wrote a really long letter because I thought I was a good writer. And I really thought that my verbosity was evidence of my good writing. And so I told them that I was, finishing this degree in international relations and that I was bilingual because my last 2 years in school, I had taken all my classes in Spanish. And though I really learned all my Spanish from the guys at the valet parking guys at the restaurant where I worked in order to pay my way through school. They were like my tutors. Learned way more from those guys than the guys at school. But anyways, so I wrote this really, really long letter and that I was really interested in immigration and migrant issues. And I had been studying Central America. But I also made sure to mention that I was absolutely determined at this point in my life, at 21, 22, to, choose a path that allowed me to be the change I wanted to see in the world. Because that was just so important. And hey, what better way for a blonde 22-year-old American to make a difference in the world than to go live in a refugee camp, right? Because surely 22-year-old me was going to be able to go live in this refugee camp and have an impact on the lives of these thousands of refugees that had already been living in this village for nearly 2 decades. And so if I go there for 2 months, I'm going to change their lives, right? Okay. So I flew to Mexico City and I meet all of my cohort. There's 12 of us volunteers from all over the world. We have a brief meeting with an administrator in the UNHCR office in Mexico City where we're told that we should never, under any circumstances, purport to be employees of the UN. That was the only message that they gave us. They gave us no guidance. They didn't tell us anything that we should do in this refugee camp, just that we were not employees of the UN and we were not allowed to pretend we were employees. Then we were sent to a grocery store to pick up some provisions and very quickly put on a 22-hour overnight bus to Campeche. Once we get to Campeche, we check into this little hotel called the Hotel Americas, and then we spend 3 days sitting on crates on the floor of a tiny office getting briefed on the history of the Guatemalan refugee situation in Mexico. Or rather, we got briefed on one version, the public version, of the history of the Guatemalans in Mexico. Then we were divided up into groups and told which of the 6 camps we would be living in for the next few months. I was paired with a Venezuelan law student named Juan and sent to live in Castell. Now, this village of Santo Domingo Castell is located about an hour from Campeche, or at least it's 1 hour south of Campeche if you're riding in that white Range Rover. If you go there on public transportation, it's 2 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours, depending on how you try to get there. And but it's just this tiny little village plopped down in the middle of nowhere. Castell was the last of the 6 refugee settlements that the Mexican government and the UNHCR formed in the states of Campeche and Quintana Roo in the 80s on a piece of land bought by a farmer just in the middle of nowhere in this space in southern Mexico. But when Castell was designed, it was the last of the refugee camps, so that they tried to rectify all of the problems that they'd had in the previous camps. And the residents of Castell were the ones that wanted to keep moving because they wanted something better. So it had become the most economically sustainable camp, and they thought it was the one where it was the most utopian image of what could happen. Every resident of Castell was given a poured concrete pad to build their house on. So even though their houses mostly consisted of sticks, they had this poured concrete pad, and they had a tin roof that was gifted to them. And then they also had access to electricity and running water. This is kind of pretty great things. Tin roof, concrete pad, electricity, running water, 4 basics of the developing world, right, that you don't always get. And like I said, there was a very particular narrative about these camps, and it was one that was very strategically spun. At this point in time, in 1997, when I moved to Castell, the Guatemalans who had chosen not to repatriate were being given the right by the Mexican government to become Mexican citizens. And this was the perfect happy ending to the migrant story, if we consider our modern day. Like, this is a pretty amazing thing, right? The Mexican government had decided that these 25,000 Guatemalans that were left in Mexico, they'd all become Mexican citizens. It's a fabulous situation. So I was filled with all this 22-year-old hope about how we were going to help facilitate this happy ending when I got my first glimpse of the village. The dirt streets of Castell are some of the straightest streets I've ever seen. You can really picture engineers walking around with machetes in this jungle land and just making these absolutely straight lines and just pouring all these concrete things. This was a planned community. And in the middle of the square of concrete streets, there's this big square overgrown with grass that kind of comes up to your knees, because until a volunteer goes out and chops it down, there's nobody to cut it down. And at the edge of the square, there's a church, and then there's this one squat concrete block building with a tin roof, the only one of the few concrete block buildings in the community, which had stenciled letters on the outside called Casa de Comar. And my white Range Rover, my chauffeur, drove me up, dropped us off in front of this concrete block building. The chauffeur said, "Hey, we'll see you later. Have a good time. Have fun." And they took off. That was it. So we go inside this concrete block building, and there's about 6 rooms, right? And they're just all concrete block. You have a tin roof. You've got a little space. And on the side, there's a few little rooms. There's one with a propane stove. There's one with some concrete benches. There's a tiny little table. There's a room that some people are obviously occupying. There's a front foyer where the engineers, the Comar engineers, will park their motorcycles. And then there was an empty room next to the bathroom where we were able to set up our hammocks and get set up. Me and my friend Juan, the Venezuelan law student. And then there was a bathroom. Now, this bathroom had a toilet in the ground in this concrete room, and it had an attempt at a shower head kind of dangling from the wall, and it had an attempt at a sink, but it had no running water. So it turned out, I found out later, that I would be sharing this space with a revolving door of 6 or 8 different Mexican engineers and Juan, my Venezuelan law student, and no running water on one toilet. The only way you could get the water to flush the toilet was to go outside with a bucket and walk 25 feet behind the building and get the bucket. So I keep going, and I am still determined to do everything I can to make a difference. But I have no work plan, no assignment, and like months laying in front of me in this concrete black building and no idea what I'm going to do at this time. The next day we get up, and Juan and I start wandering up and down the streets, trying to say hi to people, get to know the people in the village. And you could tell that the refugees, they've been through this before. We were not the first foreigners to come and smile at them and try to make friends. The children, however, were very excited to meet us, especially when they figured out, because they had played this game before, that I had a backpack full of stickers and balloons and Uno cards and a soccer ball and all of the other things. And of course I had this yellow hair. I mean, it was like I was a pink unicorn with a fluffy purple tail. I mean, they were very excited to come hang out with me. And they were knocking at our door all the time, which totally annoyed Juan. But I was doing my best to make a difference. And so I was playing with these children 12 hours a day those first 3 days. And then at the end of the third day, I hear a knock at night, just as I'd make my cup of tea, and I'm starting to get ready to go to sleep. And I hear this little timid knock at the door. Knock, knock, knock. And I hear this little timid voice going, Señorita, ingeniera. When you're a college-educated person in the campo, you're always an engineer. It doesn't matter what you do. Everybody calls you an engineer. And there was one of the little girls I'd been playing with all day, and she had this big cloth bag for me, and it was full of corn, and it was still in the husks, and it was kind of dry, but it was corn. And I thought, wow, I've made a breakthrough. This kid really wants, just like my mom sent it to me. It's a thank you. And I was absolutely determined to use this corn, right? And Juan just looks at me and he's like, you can't eat that. And I was like, well, of course I'm going to eat it, right? And then you have to remember, Juan is an upper class, I didn't quite say that, Venezuelan law student. So he had gone to preschool in Miami when his mom was jetting back and forth for, for her master's degree or something. And I was a working class kid from Minnesota. So though he was the Latin American guy and I was the gringo woman, we had this cultural shift that was a little bit difficult to divide. And so I was like, well, screw you, I'm going to eat the corn. And I boil it up. I'm proving everybody wrong. And I put some salt on it and I eat it, and it tastes like sawdust with a little bit of a crunch. And I'm absolutely determined to eat it. And I go to bed in my hammock, laying in this little room, and I wake up in the middle of the night, sick as can be. Of course I do, right? And the only thing I can do is go sit on this waterless toilet with 6 guys sleeping within 10 feet of me. And I spend all night on this toilet dreaming of a bread and a pillow and trying to muster the energy to go outside and fill that bucket so I can flush behind myself on this waterless toilet with the 10 guys sleeping, or 6 guys, I guess, sleeping within, 10 feet of me. And finally dawn comes, and Juan sees me, and he takes one look at me and says, we've got to get out of here. You've got to go to town. You've got to, and I did not want this guy to be my savior, especially after the night before. But I was like, yeah, all I want is a bed. And so I let him, help me onto a bus, and we took the 2-3 hour journey into town. And I laid in a hotel, and I let him bring me Sprite and pills from the pharmacy until I was feeling better. And then the next day I went to the grocery store and I filled up a cart with baby food, V8, soda crackers in packages, and powdered milk and dried coffee and sugar and tea. And I decided this was all I was going to eat for the next few months because I had no idea how else I was going to survive. I was not going to get that sick again. So we go back to Campeche and we try to figure out things to do. We walk around, we help register kids for school. When there's a teacher's strike and the teachers can't actually show up to school because of some political upheaval, we actually temporarily teach the school. So I'm the PE/English teacher for about a week. And the only thing that I can possibly do to keep these children occupied is play endless games of how do you say that in English, which was quite entertaining. But eventually we start to find our groove and we help with some of the citizenship paperwork. And one day one of the women from the UNHCR shows up and she says, well, you know what? We have this cooperative of women for this microloan program, and none of them are paying back their loans. So here's their names, and I'd like to see if you can get them together and figure out what's going on. So I walk around for a couple days. I find all these women. I organize a meeting, and we have this meeting, and we sit down. Turns out all these women have the money to pay back the loan under their mattresses, but they just have never in their lives, the UN wanted them to go into a bank and fill out a deposit slip and deposit the cash, and none of these indigenous Guatemalan women had ever used a bank. None of them had ever written a check. None of them, they just were absolutely terrified. So we navigated that, and then we decided to start having basic math and accounting and business classes. And Juan and I are teaching these classes together. They go on for a few weeks. It seems like it's going well. The women are coming all the time with their little kids. We're having these awesome classes. I feel like we've got this awesome rapport. And then one day at the end of class, Juan says to the women, without saying anything to me before, next time you need to not bring your kids. It's unprofessional. We cannot have this class with these children in this room. And I tried to intervene and I tried to say anything, but these women just got up silently. They looked at this 6'2" Venezuelan guy with his wavy hair, and they just said, okay, whatever, I'm scared, I'm leaving. And I was so angry. We ended up having this blowout fight later that night. Remember, he went to preschool in Miami, so he spoke better English than I spoke Spanish. So we screamed at each other all night in English, and he told me that I was this stupid American woman and I didn't understand how the world worked. And I told him he was a machista Latin American guy and he was kind of a dick. And then he packed up a bag and he decided he was going to go to Chiapas and be a tourist for the rest of the time we were supposed to be in Mexico. He was going to go explore Palenque and all these other places and meet the Zapatistas or whatever the hell he wanted to do. And I was left there by myself. The next women in the class, nobody shows up, and I'm kind of projectless, don't know what to do. And then I wake up one day, and everything in the room is shifting. I'm drenched in sweat. I'm all alone. All of even my engineer Mexican guy friends are gone. And I'm all alone in this echoey concrete building, and I have a fever like I've never experienced in my life. And in that fever, my body aches, my head aches, and I'm in this hammock, right? I can't even get my foot on the ground to step down onto the ground because I'm just so feverish. And I don't know how long I lay there, but eventually dawn comes and I'm like, okay, I have to go see the doctor at the clinic in town. I know I'm very, very sick. And I finally get myself up and I slowly walk the quarter mile to the doctor. And it must have been earlier than I thought because there's a long line of women waiting outside the doctor's office with their children. They all just look at me, this like gringa kid standing there, and they're just like, oh my God, she's really sick. I couldn't even stand in the line. I had to like sit down and hold my hand between my knees, and I just didn't know what to do, and they're all staring at me, and I can tell they're talking about me, and I know that there's something really wrong with me, but I don't know what it is, and I'm just so sick I don't even know what to do. And then eventually the doctor comes, and we'd met a few times before, and she was very brisk and professional and sweet. And she said, okay, you have dengue, you're very sick. So she was telling me I had dengue fever. You need these pills, and you need to go to town. You need to get out of here, and you need to go to the hospital. And so go back to your house, take some water, and pack a bag, and we're going to get you out of here. And so I tried to do what she said. I have no idea how long it took me to try to make my way back the quarter mile to the little house. But eventually, I remember laying in the grass and looking up the sky, and everything was just wavering around me. And suddenly, the white Range Rover appears. And it's just like this godly white beast of a machine to pack me up and take me to town and pack me back into this Hotel America and take me to a doctor until I got better. Now, I've told this story over and over again for the last 20 years of my life. The time I worked in the refugee camp and I got dengue fever. And people like myself, North Americans, will say, oh my God, that's crazy. You had dengue fever and you were living in a refugee camp. What people don't understand is that 90% of the population of that community had dengue fever at that time. It wasn't really that big of a deal. I wasn't really that special. I got boosted to the front of the line specifically because of who I was. And also realized there were things that I didn't know about this community when I lived in it. First of all, 25,000 Guatemalans were helped by the UNHCR during this time period. Do you know how many Guatemalans left Guatemala during the Guatemalan Civil War? The UN admits in public white papers now 1 million Guatemalans left Guatemala and didn't go back. So where do they live? Most of them live in the US and have lived here since 1982, more or less. And many of them stayed in Mexico. So what is the real illness here? Is it the white girl in the refugee camp with dengue fever? Because that sounds really scary to lots of us, right? Or is it something bigger? Is it something a little bit harder to put a finger on? Something that is still impacting our country today? Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. So let us welcome our next performer to the stage, Jen Loop.
Oh, good. Good
Oh,
size
you
here.
missed the meeting. We're doing it from the...
Oh, well, I actually think as long as I move this, I'll be good.
Okay.
Time to wake up. Look at those lights. Okay.
You can also move it toward you a little bit.
Yeah.
Don't mind us.
Yeah, we'll just
All right, so
finagle things. Okay, I can do this.
hi, Jen.
Hi.
How's it
How are
going?
you?
So what is one of the strangest things that you have ever seen at a wedding?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, man, I can't think of a strange occurrence. I must go to boring weddings, but that's not true. I think I love my people so much that everything that happens at weddings that I go to of close friends just seems like the most fantastic thing that could ever happen. I was thinking of a story, though, because the first wedding I went to with my long-term boyfriend, we were together 12 years, actually, throughout college and then after. He had been someone I had known from 7th grade, so I knew his parents really well. We were in classes together. We were pretty close. The first wedding I went to with him was his brother, and we still have this inside joke because we're still good friends. At some point in the middle of this wedding, his mom kicked off her shoes, and then the third person announced, "Margie's taking her shoes off," and it was just the best time. It was like the first time I saw her, like as a person. It was really great. Margie's taking her shoes off.
So
it means
that's not-
it means everything fun is going to happen. Yeah.
So that's your catchphrase now?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
always.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's in my head.
So also, I'm going to be asking Jen a bonus performer question because, a week from Thursday, on February 28th, right here, we are doing a benefit show for Groundwork Center, Cornucopia, which is going to be stories about food. So, since we're talking about sickness and health, all kinds of illnesses tonight, what's your go-to food for like comfort food when you're sick?
Yeah, bringing this together. I think when I'm sick, I don't like to eat, but I can't say no to just good homemade bread and butter. Like, that is the one thing that I will just OD on. But, if I'm sick, I guess I don't care.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you make the bread yourself while you're sick?
I have explored making bread, yes, exactly. Or my mom made a lot of homemade bread when I was growing up, so.
Nice.
Yeah.
So please come to the show on February 28th to hear stories about food. And let's give another round of applause for Jen.
My parents are divorced, and my parents got divorced when I was 25. After I had come back from college, and I did do the classic boomerang, moving back in with my parents. My younger sister she's 6 years younger than me, and she was in her senior year of high school. And there are various reasons that we can talk about for why they got divorced, but this was a major upheaval in our family. I'm the oldest. I have a younger brother who's 2 years younger than me, and my sister is 6 years younger. And my parents had been married for 35 years. They had been married 10 years before they even had me as the oldest child. And I can't even really imagine what life was for them. I knew them as a couple. I knew them as a couple that didn't always get along, but it was not terrible when I was growing up. I don't have a lot of traumatic stories. I do know that, something was wrong. At the point they got divorced, I feel like that was the right thing that could have happened. But this was 2006. And so they both still live in town. I'm from Traverse City. And they got divorced and never spoke a word to each other after that. Well, I live in Traverse. My younger sister lives in Traverse. We did this back and forth holiday thing. My brother just lives down in Ann Arbor, and he comes back for holidays. And then in 2014, my mom gets diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Now, it was a dramatic diagnosis. She had been feeling ill for 2 weeks or so and went into the doctor to get some blood work done. Well, at the point that she went into the doctor, she was jaundiced, and they called her almost an hour after they got those results back, after she had left, and immediately told her to get to the emergency room. She had a large mass that was blocking the bile duct from her pancreas, and she was not digesting anything. There was emergency surgery. They put a stent in. She made it through that, and then the diagnosis came that this was certainly cancer. Now, there are a lot of luck parts to this story, but one thing that happened was she was diagnosed in February of 2014. My sister was 8 months pregnant with her first kid, and this was the first grandchild. And so I'll be darned, but that didn't pull my mom through absolutely all the excruciating things that she would have to deal with in the following months. They really wanted to shrink that tumor before she had surgery. And so she went through chemo, she went through radiation. I was the oldest and also the not pregnant one. So I was the one going to all the appointments. I would sit with her as she was getting her chemo and as she was telling me that she would rather be nauseous and sick than lose her hair. Well, she was going through this, and my dad was asking questions of the kids, right? He wanted to know what was happening with her, but he didn't reach out to her. And this was all right. We were stuck in the middle anyway. We were going to give him the information he wanted because he did care. And I think, 4 months after her diagnosis and after all the chemo, she went down to Ann Arbor to have a Whipple procedure, which is a very serious surgery. They took out almost all of her pancreas, quite a few other organs, and she now cannot actually eat without taking a special enzyme. This is something that usually, it's a very invasive surgery. The odds are decent, but not wonderful. And she made it through. Well, about a month after that, she's recovering. There's a new baby around, my sister's daughter, Elodie. And I spent a lot of time with her as she was, as my sister needed help. And I get a phone call from my dad. And he immediately says, I think I'm having a heart attack. I need to go to the ER. So I drive over to my dad's house, and I'm through all of this with my mom. I'm a fairly stoic person in an emergency. I'm a good person to have around because I'm going to get done what needs to get done. I'll worry about it later. I'll process it later, and I'll have that reaction later once there isn't anything left to do. And so I got to my dad's house, and he had laid out all of his bills, probably with ruler precision, everything that he thought that we needed to go through. And he was crying. And this is the second time in my life, still the second time, that I've ever seen him cry. First time was when they got divorced. And he explained that he didn't think he was leaving the finances the way he wanted to leave them, but he was sure he was dying. He was absolutely positive. And he needed to talk to me about all these things as I drove him to the emergency room. Well, I drove him there, and in classic my dad fashion, he actually asked me to just drop him off. He's like, I'll be fine. No, he really thought he was dying, but he asked me to drop him off. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll check back in, I guess. And I did, and he was all right. There might have been a problem with blood pressure, but really and truly, he was feeling the effects of what was happening to my mom. He was having a panic attack. He had heard these things. He knew stuff was going on with the family. And they still didn't speak a word to each other. Now, my brother and my sister and I are pretty close. In fact, in a strange twist of fate, we all Myers-Briggs test to the same personality type. And it's like a 4% personality type. We're all INTPs. It's great. I think we all are, like the whole family. And so we process things very similarly, and we get along really well, and we really are quite close. And that has something to do with my parents, right? Even if things weren't perfect as we were growing up, something brought us together. And I know that there are some things in all of this story that I can be resentful for because it's my job to take care of these things now. Well, my mom is 5 years out of this diagnosis after this Whipple. Yeah. She's doing great. She beat every odd, and she was last cleared. And she still comes in and goes in for regular scans. And my dad is perfectly fine. There have been a few other times where he's thought something was going on, and we've been checking back in. And I think about the vows they made, and I think about their life. I mean, the 10 years without having kids, I just can't even imagine what their life was together. And then waiting so long to have me, and then being married for 35 years. And for me, I can't fathom knowing someone that well and not still being connected to them. But that's their story, and that's still their story. They still have not spoken. And it's still me and my brother and my sister taking turns figuring out what's going on with either of them. But you know what? Those marriage vows, that in sickness and in health, those are still being upheld through us, for better or for worse.
I don't know if this is the strangest thing I've ever seen at a wedding, but it was kind of strange. My college roommate, at her wedding, when it was time to throw the bouquet, the DJ got on the microphone and said, you know, now we're going to throw the bouquet, and some women ran, and I kept my seat, because that's what I do when bouquets are thrown. And then the DJ said, Karen Stein, get on the dance floor. We're throwing the bouquet. And she literally would not throw the bouquet until I stood there like this, because I was not trying to catch it. So yeah, I don't know if that's a thing, if like single friends are targeted that way by their old roommates, but if you're not married yet and you're gonna throw a bouquet one day, don't do that. That was not nice. So we're talking tonight about sickness and health. So when I was in college, I didn't cook very often. I want to say that it was because of finances. I mean, you could assume that based on what I was actually eating in college, which was like those rice-a-roni packages and ramen, and for some reason spaghetti with soy sauce. Ew. Like, I don't know why I thought that was delicious, unless it was just like I was thinking I didn't have a lot of money and I forced myself to think that was delicious, but now I just, ew. I will never be doing that again. But it actually wasn't so much finances as I ordered in a lot. And, you know, I had several go-to places, but mostly it was Chinese food, which is just the love of my life. And it was always from the same place, and I would get this spicy chicken dish and shrimp fried rice. And so one night, I ordered exactly that, and I took like 2 bites of the fried rice, and I thought, this doesn't smell very good. And then the voice of my mother with her mom proverb, when in doubt, throw it out. So that's exactly what I did, and ordered a Domino's pizza and went on with my life until I woke up in the middle of the night. I, honest to goodness, was having a dream that Murphy Brown was interviewing me about stomach aches. And I woke up and I barfed. Now, that wouldn't necessarily be noteworthy, except I have not thrown up since that night. And that night was in 1992. Thank you. Thank you. I would venture to guess that me not throwing up is older than some of you in this room. And it's not right. Like, you're supposed to throw up. I mean, that's what bodies do. It's not supposed to be scary, but because it's been so long since I have thrown up, to me that is like the most terrifying thing. Like, and it makes me kind of a bad friend too, because if I'm talking to someone and they say, oh yeah, I have the stomach flu, and I'm thinking, and I say to them, you're like, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, but in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, when was the last time I saw you, and did you touch me? The good news is that I didn't blame the food. You know, like it's Chinese food. I can't be mad at it. It was the restaurant, 100%. And so I got over it. However, I cannot say the same for strawberries, which I have not touched since 1980, when that betrayed me. and everything in my insides. So yeah, it's a really strange phenomenon to be phobic of like something that people just do. So, preemptively, if you ever say to me, I think I have the stomach flu, don't be offended if I jump 10 feet away from you and then try to convince you it was food poisoning. All right, so we have a couple more storytellers for the second half. Help me welcome to the stage David Fink. Hey, cousin. My cousin. So,
literally cousin.
Literally my cousin. Also, actually, while David fixes the microphone, I want to let you all know that he actually produces a storytelling show in Chicago called Outspoken, which is LGBT plus specific storytelling. It happens at Sidetrack on the first Tuesday of every month.
Thank you.
And that gives me a good segue to let you all know that this year, once again, there will be a Hearsay storytelling show as part of the Up North Pride Week. And so that show will be here on June 17th. I love doing shows here. So David, what is one of the strangest things you've ever seen at a wedding?
One of my college friends got married, and she is half German, half Chinese, and her husband's half Finnish, half Jewish. And their parents, I think, are all divorced and all wanted their culture represented in the wedding. So they had as many traditions from all these four cultures in a wedding. You can imagine red dress and breaking glass. And I think it was a competition. Whose culture can have the most things they do.
Did they do any, like gefilte fish combinations?
No, it wasn't a food thing. It was just other things.
Okay. That sounds interesting.
No gefilte fish.
Yeah, good. I wouldn't want to be at that wedding. I mean, if there was gefilte fish. All right, another round of applause for David Fink.
Thank you. So I'm standing right above the patient's head. The patient is right there. I could lean down and touch him. I'm standing next to two anesthesiologists as I watch the surgeon take a scalpel and slice down the patient's torso, and then take a little saw and cut him and open him up, and then take ice to stop his heart. You'd think there'd be something more technological, but no, it's just ice. And it's a very strange way that I got there. At the time, I worked for a metal company, and I became president of the Chicago chapter of the metal recycling trade organization, and I'm a very nervous public speaker. And one of my friends in the industry at my first meeting that I chaired pulled me aside afterwards and said, "David, you seem really nervous chairing that meeting. Maybe you should take a class or something to get more comfortable speaking in public." And I had been offered free classes at Second City, so I called up and said, "Is that offer still good?" And they said, "Yes." So I signed up for classes at Second City, and it did help. If you can improvise on stage in front of an audience, it's much easier to chair a meeting about something that you're somewhat familiar as opposed to just making something up. But anyway, in my class at Second City, one of the guys invited me to a fundraiser. It was a fundraiser for a summer camp for Lithuanian kids. And I got this fundraiser, and I got there early, and they had a silent auction. So I don't do this anymore, but at that time, I just was the first bidder for anything nobody bid on, just to get things started. And at the end of the evening, yeah, you see why I don't do that anymore. Yeah, there's a risk. So at the end of the evening, it turns out I was the only bidder. And I won the chance to be in an operating room and watch an open heart surgery. For $50. Now, the problem is I'm very squeamish. I can't watch, like, horror movies. I have a real tough time with medical stuff and blood. But I made a vow to myself. In improv, you have a concept called yes and somebody says something to you on stage, you have to take it and go with it and add to it. And so I started doing that at Burning Man and then in life, where if somebody gives me the opportunity to do something I've never done before, I have to say yes and do it unless it's illegal, dangerous, or disgusting. Then I have the option but not requirement of saying no. And I thought, well, I can make a case that open heart surgery is disgusting because it is, medical stuff really is to me. But I thought, I'm going to do this. So I flew out to Philadelphia, rented a car, drove to New Jersey. And first thing in the morning, I met the head of cardiothoracic surgery. I told him I was hoping to see a valve replacement because my mother had that in the mid '60s, and I thought it would be really interesting to see the surgery that my mother had. But it's kind of triage, and you don't know what you're going to see till you get there because whatever patient needs it the most goes first. So the surgeon took me to his office. He showed me blockages in the patient's heart. I was going to see a quintuple bypass. Told me the patient's medical history. This was his second heart attack. He was 50 years old. He didn't change his lifestyle after his first one. He smokes, he drinks, he's obese, and this was a major heart attack. So I then went down and scrubbed in, and I had to wait until the patient was intubated before I could go into the room, the operating room, and it was taking a very long time. And because the patient was so obese, they were having a very tough time getting tubes down his throat. And I was panicking because not only am I squeamish, but I'm thinking, he's not even going to make it, and this is just terrible. But they ended up getting him intubated. I went in the room, and they gave me my one instruction. My only instruction was, if you faint, fall backwards, not into the patient's chest cavity. That was my one responsibility. Yeah, it was very smart of them to tell me this. And so I'm standing next to two anesthesiologists. One of them is really just monitoring dials, and he said I could ask him questions. He was explaining stuff as things are going on. And the mood in the operating room was fairly light and fun and playful with music until they stopped the patient's heart and he went on a heart-lung machine. Then no jokes, no music, no nothing. It was very serious. The operating room was cold, and I don't remember any smells. I think it was just antiseptic. One of the things that kind of helped me with my squeamishness, and to prepare, I tried to watch operation shows on TV, but I couldn't. I couldn't sleep. And so I tried to envision what it was going to be, which was like blood shooting everywhere. And my visions are not helping, so I just did it. But it's not bloody. It's very clean. They cauterize all the time. And one of the surgeons was Dr. Seinfeld, who was Jerry Seinfeld's cousin. And everybody really knew what they're doing. I thought if I need open heart surgery, I would come here to this team because everybody knew their job. There was a person in the room that was a patient advocate. Her whole job was to make sure there's no impropriety. There's a nurse who I believe her whole job was to count pieces of equipment to make sure nothing got left in the patient. So she's keeping inventory all the time. Everybody knew what they were doing. And they do the surgery. It's, I think, about 5 hours, and it was fascinating. I was never bored. I was never uncomfortable. It was just so interesting to watch. And then they, test the heart to make sure there's no leaks, and they pour warm water on it to start again. It's just so simple, but. And one of the things, there are a couple of things that made it a little easier. One of them is for me, was the patient was all shaved and his skin was yellow, because I guess it's an antiseptic that covered him. So it looked like he was made out of rubber. It didn't really look like a human being to me. And I think that was the thing that helped me get through it the most. But the part of the surgery that disturbed me the most is when they closed him up and they put a little plastic tube in to be a drain, and they kind of pull him shut with wires. And I just thought, although he's a big man, he's obese, bodies are flimsy. And I think of myself as substantial, but this is kind of easy to penetrate. And there's just not much here. There's not much protection. And I felt like frail. And I also looked around the operating room, and nobody in the operating room was obese. And I asked the anesthesiologist, I said, this patient has a lot of fat on his heart. Is that typical? And he said, everyone's got some fat, but this is really excessive. And so when I left the operating room, I went straight to the gym. And I've been pretty good about exercising since then, because I can't necessarily prevent that heart attack, But if I have it, my surgery doesn't have to be anywhere near as invasive as what this guy went through. And to this day, I'm still, have a strong memory of this, and I'm still working out. Thank you.